Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday at 1 p.m, both here in the building and live online. Hi, if you're watching us online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. My name is Martin O'Leary. I am the head of studio here. I'm a white man in my 40s, long hair and a beard, wearing a very chunky red jumper on this absolutely freezing day. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer you the chance to spend some time in our space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So especially big welcome to anyone who's new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put your hand up quickly? All right. Welcome. This bit is for you. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? And for the people online. We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, UWE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England. And what we do is we offer studio space, including desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all to free for our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And most of all, we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So just a few notes before we begin. Please do feel free to move around. There's a kitchen back there. You're welcome to grab some tea or coffee, a glass of water. If you need to take a break at any point, there is a quiet space just to my left, your right, around the corner there. There's a little room with some sofas and beanbags and things. It's reasonably well soundproofed. If you hear a fire alarm, that's probably real. We're not expecting a fire drill. So fire exits are at either end of the studio on the other side. So again, my left, your right, head down to that end of the studio and then they're on either side. But in any event, one of the studio team will direct you towards them should we need to use them. And then there are accessible toilets, including baby change, over there in the corridor just next to the kitchen. There will be a Q&A at the end of this talk. If you're watching online, please pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Vanessa is here. She will be your voice in the room today. If you're in the building, then please raise your hand and I'll send around a microphone so the folks at home can hear what you're saying. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, at pmstudiouk.bsky.social on Blue Sky, or at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram. All right. Our speakers for today are Rachael Burton and Akshara Pulpa, Watershed's co-directors of Regenerative Futures. And for the past 6 months, they've been thinking about the environmental, operational and maintenance challenges of our 19th century building, with several elements reaching the end of their life. Today, they're going to talk about our vision for a place-led redevelopment that balances the changing needs of our organisation with adapting to the impacts of the climate crisis, which is a project that we call Watershed Wild and Generous. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Rachael and Akshara.
Thanks, Martin. Hello. As Martin said, we're here to talk about Wild and Generous. It would be really good to just get a sense of who's heard of Wild and Generous before. Okay, maybe half, that's useful to know. So we're going to tell you what we mean by Watershed Wild and Generous and then talk a bit through our process of how we've come from kind of 6 months ago when we joined the organisation to now. But the initial concept of Wild and Generous began way before we joined. It came out of a series of expert community workshops back in 2023. And we asked the question, what will the world want from a cultural venue in a climate crisis? So since then, the project has grown from a concept to the kind of very early stages of a tangible regenerative capital project. We're still holding on to those early ideas that were generated from those workshops. So we think that the world will want compelling stories, resting spaces, places to cool down, hopeful visions and togetherness from a cultural venue in a climate crisis. So if we fast forwards to April this year, as Martin said, we were recruited as co-directors of Regenerative Futures. We hadn't met before the process. We both applied for one job. And then through the recruitment process, the team kind of quickly realised that the scope of this role is bigger than kind of one full-time person, but also covers more expertise than you can reasonably expect one person to have. So lucky for us, they hired both of us. And we bring kind of very different but complementary skills. So my background is as a producer, project manager. I worked here in the studio for a long time as a producer. And as a freelancer, I work on projects spanning new economies, transformational wealth redistribution, and equitable technologies. So a range of different things. And then I work part-time on Wild and Generous and lead on our fundraising strand, communities and partnerships, heritage, and then we co-lead on our nature strand.
Great, thanks Rachel. I'm Akshara. My background's in architecture, so I'm a practicing architect. Before this role, I was working in practice for over 10 years on a range of education, community and cultural projects. And I'm particularly interested in our creative reuse of existing buildings. And I'm also a qualified retrofit coordinator. So I lead the kind of building strand of Wild and Generous. So to kick off today's presentation, I wanted to just introduce a couple of terms that we would refer to over the course of it. Appreciate some of you might be familiar with this already. So retrofit is work that we do to an existing building to improve its performance. So that's to keep the heat in. We could better describe that as like putting a jacket on a building. And then decarbonisation. To decarbonise is to reduce the amount of carbon emissions that we put into the atmosphere. So shifting away from fossil fuels is a really key step in decarbonising. Sustainability is about meeting our present needs, but also taking care of the needs of future generations. And sustainability as an approach centres on reducing harm to the environment. And regeneration is, on the other hand, about creating a net positive impact on people and the planet, and in that way differ slightly from sustainability. And regenerative design seeks to restore human and living systems so that they can thrive and co-evolve together. So just a very short introduction on our home. We are located on Bristol's historic harbour site, and the sheds that we work in today were originally used to store goods that were shipped into the city docks. Both of our sheds, called Transit Shed E and Transit Shed W, were used to store goods that were shipped into the centre. We kind of call them E Shed and W Shed, and that's how we'll refer to them from now. Industrial activity in the floating harbour began to decline in the 1970s, which led to the eventual closure of the docks. So in the early 70s and 80s, this area of Cannons Marsh was actually quite derelict, and the city was making plans not only to demolish quite a lot of the buildings, but also to see how they could regenerate this area. So Watershed was one of the first buildings to reopen in 1982 as Britain's first media and communication centre. And just to note that both of our buildings are Grade 2 listed, kind of heritage buildings. So we have been in this building for over 43 years. It's wonderfully characterful. It has really lovely lofty spaces. There's some really unique heritage features, good views out to the harbour, but the building is also leaky, increasingly uncomfortable and quite expensive to operate. So our building, which was a warehouse, wasn't really designed to sort of cater to a cultural building in the 21st century, nor can it really cope with the effects of climate change. So when it was built, the average rainfall was about 677 millimetres on average, but now it's more like 1,200. So really the roof infrastructure wasn't designed to take the capacity of rainfall that we see today. And we also know that parts of our building are deteriorating and that we need to carry out really essential repairs so that our buildings are fit for purpose now and for the future. At the same time, heat is pouring out through our building. And this is quite significant because with recent geopolitical shocks, the cost of our energy bills is rapidly increasing. So we know that we need to retrofit the building in order to reduce the amount of energy that we're consuming and try and transition away from fossil fuels. But to do this, we need to look at the site as a whole and develop a kind of master plan as a strategy. We also know that we're in a public funding crisis. So we need to be quite innovative and resourceful in the way that we do this work, fundraise this work, and also finance it. And all of this is set in the context of social and ecological challenges, such as growing inequality and loss of natural habitats and biodiversity. So over the last couple of years, we've been talking to our communities and starting to imagine something slightly outside the box, where we integrate this retrofit project in larger ecological and social transformation. And so we call this project Wild and Generous. So Watershed Wild and Generous is a holistic vision for Watershed, as well as our wider Cannons Road area, that centres notions of wildness and generosity. And that's to create more welcoming and more inclusive spaces in a really key part of the city centre. It is a building redevelopment project, but it's also an action research project. And we want to take a regenerative approach to this work, which means that we want to be non-extractive and kind and responsible. We want to create a place where nature and humans can thrive and co-evolve. We know that this is quite a large project, so it will be a multi-phase project in order to secure the longer-term future of the building. And we've identified these 5 strands to Wild and Generous. That's building communities and partnerships, nature, heritage, and future stewardship. All of the phases of work will involve all 5. They have many interdependencies and overlaps. Today we'll be talking more about the building and then also a bit about nature and heritage. Communities and partnerships is vital to all of the work that we do. And on stewardship, this is something that we are still delving into, but we're really interested in the role of the city and how we can be custodians of this civic space collectively. So to dive in a bit more into our building, one of the first things we did as we started in post was to commission a really detailed survey of our building to understand its current condition and then identify priorities around repair and replacement that would inform a kind of maintenance plan effectively for the building. We also did an appraisal of our services, which are for heating, cooling, and ventilation. And I think we all know that quite a lot of our installations are aging. Some of them are quite ineffective and inefficient at dealing with the sorts of loads and uses of the spaces. So we do also need to think about a renewal strategy for these. And we were working with some excellent kind of engineers, Green Gauge energy consultants, and we looked at the proportion of heat that we were losing through each element of the building. We lose about a quarter through our single glazed windows and single glazed roof lights, then 17% through our brickwork walls, which are not insulated, they're a solid wall construction. And there's only a limited amount of insulation within our roof build-up. Interestingly, there's also a really high proportion, about 40%, which we attribute to ventilation losses. And that's to do with the kind of leakiness of the construction, but also the fact that our ventilation systems, they pull out this hot air that we're heating in the space and expel it. So we have to continue putting more energy and heat into the building. And through consultation, we have also started to understand kind of comfort in the building, or perhaps I should say discomfort. But we know how this varies so much from space to space, and as you walk through the building, you encounter a range of kind of thermal environments. We know that a lot of our spaces really suffer from overheating, which is really significant in summer, and with climate change, we appreciate how much that can get worse. We also know that our spaces can get quite stuffy, quite hot, and quite humid, and that's because we don't really have sufficient natural ventilation or sufficient kind of mechanical systems to assist us with this. And we also know that we have a number of different activities that happen in our buildings. Some of them generate a lot of heat, others require some heating. But at the moment, there's no way, and this is a shame, that we can't kind of recover heat from one place and deliver it into another. So we have arrived at a retrofit and decarbonisation strategy, which looks at some of these challenges and proposes ways in which we can improve the kind of performance of our building and our systems. So I'll start with the 4 kind of retrofit measures that we identified. First and foremost, our roofs. They cover a really large surface area. We know that we have really urgent challenges around its condition. So in the process of doing that re-roofing work, we think that's a great place to start to improve the insulation within it. And then next, linked to this, replacing some of our single glazed roof lights and upgrading some of our windows so that they're not only better thermally, but also we can operate them better and use them for ventilation, particularly in the summer months. We also have identified a couple of areas where some local kind of insulation improvements would make quite a big difference. An example of this is this floor, which is above the walkway, actually doesn't have any insulation in it, so that would actually create better separation from downstairs and upstairs. And lastly, we won't be doing anything to the walls, and partly that's because we think the brickwork is a really important quality or character in terms of heritage, but also it's a very expensive and quite a complex thing to do. So we've been looking at kind of payback and analysis on that. And then in terms of services, our first step is to come off our kind of end-of-life gas boilers and shift to a lower carbon renewable energy system in the form of air source heat pumps. And that would be coupled with some new chillers that would help with our cooling demand. We also propose installing a range of mechanical ventilation systems which have inbuilt kind of heat recovery. So we're using the heat that we're already generating in the building. And then finally, we have, with this large roof area, we have a great opportunity to look at how we can generate some of the power that we need on site. So we'd be looking in more detail at the capacity that we could get from solar panels on the roof. And we appreciate that this is quite a lot of work to undertake to a building that is occupied. We know that it will need to be delivered in phases. We think the focus should be on Watershed and the roof of Watershed, and new plant infrastructure or service infrastructure in the first instance. So that would be in the next sort of 2 to 3 years. And then we would move on to look at the roof of Watershed and additional kind of services. So to do any of this construction work, we will be navigating complexities around programming this, the construction work alongside our own activities to manage disruption. I just thought I'd pull out some numbers from the services report, which started to describe the changes in terms of carbon as well as the cost of operating. So this is only looking at our heating. At the moment, the amount of carbon that we generate through our gas boilers is about 90 tonnes of carbon a year. We think that through the installation of these retrofit works, as well as new heat pumps, we can bring that down to about 3 tonnes of carbon a year. And that's linked to the electricity that's needed to still run them. So there is a small amount left, which we can, through solar panels on the roof, bring down even further. So we're looking at about a 90% reduction in carbon emissions and about a 73% reduction in running costs around heating. But in order to do all of this work, we know that we need quite a lot of new raw material, new technologies, and also things, there would be waste generated from this process, and we are mindful of that and want to be responsible in how we do any construction work. The modern construction industry has a huge reliance on materials that are imported from all over the world. And unfortunately, the social and the economic, as well as the ecological costs of extracting and processing these materials is completely invisible to us as end users here. So we want to support a kind of transition towards materials that are renewable, natural, more locally sourced, so that we can help shape more equitable practices around growth and production. And then, of course, we need skilled people to help us use these materials. So we want to kind of look at how we can foster a network of repairers, makers, and builders that are trained to work with these new materials. So in short, we want to test that an alternative way of designing and making is possible that is kinder to people and planet. Or to use the donut economics model that's on screen, we know we need to operate within the space that is safe and just for humanity, but also meets our needs as humans and our well-being, but within the boundary, which is on the outside, which is the ecological ceiling or our planetary limits. So our next piece of work will involve looking more closely at materials that we can source more locally, do a bit of a mapping on people, processes and practices to understand how that can shape the retrofit design in particular. And lastly, I just wanted to credit a few organisations whose work has been really relevant to our thinking and really helped us shape this work. We Can Make in Knoll West, Civic Square in Birmingham, and Material Cultures.
So we're going to move on and talk a bit about our nature strand now. So the vision for Wild and Generous extends beyond the building into our outside spaces. So we have spaces around the building. Currently, it's dominated by hard surfaces. It's very grey. It's configured for cars, not for people, and certainly not for nature. We really want to think about how we extend the generosity of Wild and Generous to nature to support local biodiversity, and also think about urban habitat recovery and create spaces where humans and nature can co-thrive. So neither of us are nature experts, but we are enthusiasts, and we're really lucky to have a whole range of brilliant, talented organisations and people here in Bristol locally that we can work in partnership with. So we've been really kind of building up what those partnerships might look like over the last few months. So we began with some research and a nice trip to London. So we did a few study visits. We went to have a look at, here's some photos from when we went to have a look at the Natural History Museum and other kind of green urban spaces. And then we also started some potential partnership conversations. So we're having a think about what already exists, what might exist, what is appropriate for the space that we're in. And talking about what's appropriate for the space that we're in, our closest neighbour is the water right next to us. So our building sits at the entrance to the harbour side, the gate that is right at the end there. That is the way in. So that's where the culverted River Frome meets the River Avon and then into the floating harbour. But despite our proximity to the water and our name, we don't really have a relationship to the water, much less one that we can articulate. So through Wild and Generous, we have an opportunity to explore really what that means and what a meaningful collaboration with the water might look like in the future. So to begin this kind of research project, we wanted to reconnect with the water and particularly with the River Frome. So back in July, we decided to walk from the source of the Frome all the way through to here at Watershed. It's quite far. We did it in 2 parts, not one. So we wanted to understand the kind of potential for more than a human collaborator in this project and think about how it flows through from the source back to us. We kind of noticed where the countryside meets the layers of the city, and actually maybe surprisingly or unsurprisingly, we didn't see much wildlife until we reached Eastfield Park. So there wasn't much when we were out more in the countryside. And it's also quite, some people will have seen it in this room, but it's really quite unceremonious to see where it goes underground and disappears just after St Paul's before it then comes back just outside here. It runs all the way down underground, but a lot of local people don't know that. So we really want to better understand how we can care for it and what our role as an arts organisation might be as we sit right next to it, what we can do here, but then also further upstream. So this is part of our process of moving beyond a sole focus on human needs to include nature as a collaborator and consider its needs in our thinking and planning for a future watershed. So as I said, when we look around our building, there's a lot of grey. You can see the back of our building there and then the front here. We're in a really prime position, and there's a lot of footfall and there's a lot of tourism, and there's so much potential to improve these spaces for both people and nature. So we really want to dig into what we can do. So we want to reimagine what these spaces could look like with native planting, aquatic planting, designed to increase biodiversity with softer edges to the water and a real chance for habitat recovery. So if we move out further, we are these two sheds here. So we're in the Cannons Marsh area, which kind of covers this. So we have these ambitions ourselves, but actually we can do more if we join up further. So we want to connect with our closest physical neighbours, so the sheds and businesses around us, and see what bigger impact we might be able to have. So in a couple of weeks, we're co-hosting a roundtable with the West of England Nature Partnership to have a look at how we might bring in more green and blue spaces into the greyer parts of Cannons Marsh. So we really want to share our public realm ambitions, wild and generous, hear about other plans, explore how we might connect up, work in partnership with both other local landowners and businesses, but also ENGOs, urban designers, ecologists, authorities and agencies at a local and national level. So at this roundtable, we're going to be exploring big ideas, ambition, real and potential obstacles, and think holistically about the practical ways that nature can help Cannons Marsh reach its full potential.
Great. And I just wanted to share a couple of pictures from one of our little pilot projects for Wild and Generous. It was a kind of happy accident. The brief was to create some new seating outside our undershed bar and main entrance. But that was quite a useful way, I think, to test some ideas around how we can enliven this kind of public realm at ground floor, how we can introduce some greenery, and also see how people start to kind of interact with these installations. So the way that we designed it was really heavily influenced by the materials that were available to us. So these are some pictures from the Bristol Wood Recycling Project. We were really drawn to this top picture here, which shows stacks upon stacks of pallet wood sections that had been dismantled from old pallets. And we quite enjoyed their kind of multicoloured ends. And so we used these to make some of the planters. Interestingly, pallets are actually made out of virgin wood, so it's trees that have been felled to make this wood, used often only once to deliver something to site, and then they usually get skipped or turned into wood chip or burnt, so they have an extremely short life. And we were quite interested in showing how you could use or reuse some of this material to creatively imagine a new way of using it. So these pallet wood sections were planed, they were painted in this natural red oxide paint. They were then cut down to length and then stacked on top of each other and then secured with a rod. And all of this assembly is dismantleable, so we can change the shape or form of the use of these planters in time. And we made a number of these planters of varying heights and scale in order to create a bit of variety. You can see them downstairs, but they're sort of nestled in between the columns, forming new connections with the harbour side, creating opportunities to sit and pause. And they're one of the only public kind of seats that's available to us along this stretch of the harbour side. So actually we see quite a lot of people stopping for a moment there, which we quite enjoy. And for the bench tops, we used some locally felled sycamore. We kept its kind of waning edge that you can just see there. And we thought this was quite a nice contrast to the otherwise quite precise and machined nature of the planters. The planting was supported by Blaze Nursery, Bristol City Council's Blaze Nursery. And this has been a really interesting test. It's obviously quite a small but vibrant intervention, but I think it gives us some clues as we continue to think about how we might redesign our external spaces. And also just a quick thank you to Brendan, Jed and Richard for their help in making them.
So we're going to move on to our third strand now, heritage. So as we look ahead to Watershed Wild and Generous, we're also looking back into our past. Akshara gave an overview of the history of the building, but we know that we need to face head-on the tensions of balancing the preservation of a heritage asset with future sustainability. So we want to connect to Watershed's past and where it sits on the marsh, and then also think about its possible futures. So our definition of heritage goes beyond the physical building, but the heritage of the culture of the communities who use the space, who have and will continue to animate it. So we're interested in surfacing oral histories, people's stories and memories of Watershed, cultural traditions that have impacted or been impacted by Watershed through storytelling, celebrations and events that mark a specific moment for a community that either happened at Watershed or were delivered in partnership with the organisation elsewhere in the city, and also speculative futures, so representing a vision for Watershed, for what it might be in the future for our communities in Bristol for the next 100 years. And this gorgeous illustration is by a studio resident and artist called Jazz Thompson. I'm going to show you a few more of hers. So this hot off the press is a new publication by Professor Sean Sobers and then illustrated by Jasmine. So as a starting point for this heritage work, we commissioned Sean to lead a research project exploring the historical trajectory, current networks and future possibilities of Black filmmaking and exhibition in Bristol. So this project celebrates the creativity and resilience of Black filmmakers, curators and audiences who've shaped Bristol's cultural landscape for over 4 decades. So from pioneering organisations such as Black Pyramid Films, As It Is TV, to contemporary collectives including Black Wave and Cables and Cameras, and fan films, Bristol's Black film culture has continually innovated through community-led practice, curatorial experimentation and collaborative partnerships. So we called this piece Reframing the Frame, Interpreting the Past, Present and Future of Black Film in Bristol. So this final report was published earlier this week. And if you want to have a look at it, come and have a look after, and it's also on our website. It's really brilliant, it's worth having a read. So the project included archival research, oral histories, and then we had 2 major roundtable discussions, one here and one that was recorded at UGMA FM and then broadcast earlier this week, but again, you can listen online. So the discussions highlighted several themes that are then in the report. So the importance of authorship and ownership, the role of audiences in shaping meaning, and the need for spaces that foster creative agency and cultural safety. So this work has been a really brilliant opportunity to explore narrative reframing, storytelling, and also speculative futures, all connected to Watershed's heritage and beyond, as we work always in partnership across the city and further. So the report identifies 6 priorities and a number of recommendations for the future, as well as a plan for phase 2 of this work. This is just the starting point of this. All of this will feed into the future plans of the building. So I want to say a huge thank you to Sean, Jazz, and everyone who participated in the roundtable discussions. So as we move more into the delivery phase of Wild and Generous, we'll be expanding our scope to include heritage explorations with other communities who've played a vital role in the organisation, both in the past and in the future. So that's us walking through 3 of our 5 strands. As we said earlier, communities and partnership is woven into all of them. So I just wanted to kind of bring up some challenges. This is an enormous project. So as you can imagine, there are more than a few challenges with this work, and we just wanted to share some of them alongside our reflections so far. So we're continually balancing, centering values-aligned, careful work alongside the urgency to fix a failing roof and services that are end of life. So the balance of those two things is continually there. And there's probably not a right answer to those. It's just an ongoing thing we have to work with. Resourcing a lot of our design needs internally by having Akshara in-house or kind of client-side, which is quite unusual for a cultural organisation as an architect, has enabled us to deliver a very cost-effective approach, essentially. And it also allows us to work quickly because Akshara can translate technical information to the rest of the team much quicker than an external company could for us. We have a very large fundraising target, as you can probably imagine, by all the work that we're talking about. And that's just for the first phase of work. So Akshara mentioned earlier, and I'm sure all of you are aware, but the fundraising climate is dire in this country at the moment. A significant number of trusts and foundations are moving either to spend down their investment or they're moving them away from the arts and into other spaces. Bristol City Council is considering cutting completely its arts funding. Multiple funders have reported that in just the last 12 months, the success rate for funding applications has dropped from around 18% to 7%. So that's a huge challenge for us in the way that we design and deliver the work and phase it. So we also have a very careful balancing act of developing an ambitious and future-facing capital project alongside the day-to-day running of an arts venue amidst a polycrisis and in a landscape of other arts organisations that are closing down or struggling. And that's very difficult, how you do those two things in parallel. The challenge, we've brought this before, but the challenge of protecting a heritage asset that is listed and then also developing a future-facing vision that centres people in nature is another thing that we have to do in tandem. And then finally, taking a regenerative approach and centering bioregional materials within a construction industry that is materially extractive is something that we will be pushing against as we move into the delivery phase. But it's also a great opportunity for storytelling. I think all of this is a great opportunity for us to weave into our programming and our work as we kind of look ahead. So to support us in addressing all of these challenges and more, I'm really delighted that we've just recruited a brilliant advisory circle. So they've got expertise across capital projects, regenerative design, architecture, community engagement, urban design and planning, and also nature. So our advisors will both support and challenge us, help us deliver our vision and strategy and plan, and also think about ensuring that we're always values aligned in what we're doing. This is just an opportunity to show some of the feedback that we've recently had, because we were, with all of those challenges, you might go, well, why are you doing it? Because Watershed is really important to the people of Bristol and to the harbour side, and we really need to future-proof both the building and the organisation. So these are just some of the lovely responses that we've received in response to our Cinema of the Year nomination at the British Independent Film Awards. If you're not on social media, you might not realise that you can vote for us, so that's a little plug. We've been really humble about it and haven't said anything, so you should vote. And that is it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel and Akshara. Do we have any questions from the audience? All right, Michael, you can kick us off.
You've talked about heat pumps. What source of heat or cooling are you looking at? Just air to air, or the large thermal inertia you've got outside in terms of water that is used for the district heating? And also, is there any chance of connecting to the district heating network in Bristol?
Good question. All questions we had. We did look at, as part of this study, the feasibility of connecting to the district heat network. We also looked at the potential of using the water, the floating harbour, as a kind of source. Both of those, for different reasons, were less favourable in comparison to an air source heat pump, which would be kind of on the roof. With using the water, actually, you're also drawing in quite a lot of the things that are suspended within it. So the maintenance burden of that, but also the size of kind of plant or service infrastructure we would need for our loads was actually longer than the length of our building. So we did do a bit of study looking at that.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Hi, thanks for that. I was just wondering, given the difficulty that you said around fundraising, like what are the other, like are there other considerations for the kind of financial sustainability of something like this in terms of different options?
In terms of doing the capital project, the fundraising for that?
Yeah, and kind of what options are there for keeping a space to be a space like this as opposed to, you know, being another set of offices or something like that, that's sustainable outside of or sustainable within an environment where fundraising is very difficult.
We're kind of exploring all options, but we very much want to keep Watershed as Watershed and the kind of cultural hub that it is. So we're looking at kind of multiple different fundraising options, looking at how we maximise, we have tenants downstairs, how we maximise the use of our building to make it as kind of profitable as possible, and then that profit goes back into the charity. Yeah, it's difficult, but we're exploring what we can do. We're working with an external fundraising consultant, Lauren Sholey, as well, to help us draft that strategy.
Anything else? Phil?
There was quite a dense diagram, a donut diagram that you sort of whipped past. And
Yeah, I can go
it was
back.
basically incomprehensible. I just like, what was it trying to tell me? And can you just describe what's going on in it?
I can try. It's from, the donut itself was from Donut Economics Action Lab, which was developed by Kate Raworth. The model sort of describes the donut as this green band, and it talks about how our activity, human activity, economic activity, needs to sit within this band. And the inner kind of circle talks about all of the kind of social dimensions that the kind of human needs in order to meet our basic requirements as well as well-being.
So there's sort of an axis that goes from the centre to the rim. What is that axis?
So that means that if our activity is too far in here, then we're not meeting our basic needs. And if our activity comes out to here, that means that we're overshooting the planetary boundaries. Okay. Does that make sense? So that's the kind of shortfall overshoot. I'm sure there's lots more very lengthy YouTube videos of explaining that than I could there.
Okay.
This is amazing work. I didn't actually realise the planters were one of the outcomes of this, actually. I just already really loved them.
It was the happy...
They're great. I had a question about, like, whether... Because, I mean, to me, it all seems incredibly forward-thinking and innovative, but I also just wondered whether there were reference points, whether there were projects out there doing similar things with heritage buildings that have sort of been successful or done it really well that you can point to in a sort of hopeful, like, this can be done kind of way.
Possibly, in some ways, yes, there are lots of organisations doing incredibly progressive work, looking at how we sort of transition out from the current kind of climate into looking at more hopeful, more regenerative models. So Civic Square and We Can Make that I mentioned, they do this work, but they're more focused on kind of domestic settings or retrofit or, yeah, kind of new house building. What we haven't really found is perhaps a cultural venue kind of leading this work, at least in the UK. We know perhaps the kind of ideas around regenerative design are slightly more furthered across Europe. But yeah, I think we haven't quite found one that is like, okay, they've done it first, like, let's see how we can learn from that. So in some ways we are treading new waters.
We've been looking, and we would like to. Yeah.
And if anyone knows any, please.
Great talk. How much dosh do you actually need to raise for all of the regeneration? You've mentioned various phases, like phase 1, so presumably there's a phase 2 and maybe there's a phase 3. How much dosh do you need to raise? Is there going to be a public appeal
How much dosh, like that is kind of $1 million question. Do you mean for the whole project?
For the whole of the project, for the whole of the regeneration?
We
broadly
don't have a
speaking?
number for that yet because we haven't done the whole master plan. We're looking at the roof and the services of this is Watershed, of this building. That's about £7 million just for this one. Then we've got a second one. Then we're looking outside. So if you want to do some maths on that, it's a big number.
And is there going to be a public appeal?
We will do something.
And do we know when that will be?
Next year. We'll do something next year. Yeah, we don't know exactly what the framing of that will be yet, but we definitely, our audience is kind of very involved and generous, and we will kind of go out and share and ask.
If you'd like to get ahead of the game on that, watershed.co.uk/donate. Any other questions? Yeah, it's Tom.
I was just wondering, you mentioned black filmmakers. What other communities are you trying to connect with in terms of the heritage?
Great question. We haven't fully decided yet. Queer communities are a community that really use our space in lots of different ways with lots of different meetups. There's a lot of queer people in the studio and in our staff team, so that's definitely one we'll look at. People who are homeless often sleep under the walkway there, and they're a really core, they use our toilets, they're a really core part of our community, so we'll also be doing some work with that community, but we're also looking kind of beyond that. We work with deaf audiences a lot, particularly in our deaf conversations about cinema. This is a much bigger kind of research project to explore who specifically we want to and wants to work with us to build out those stories and think about both past and future. That was reframing the frame was kind of a prototype project to go, what are the questions that we might ask? What are people interested in? And it will be different, of course, for each community. But if you've got ideas, Tom, I would love them.
Hi, thanks a lot for that talk. That was really, really interesting, and really kind of nice to see the visual descriptors of how you've been looking at the building and the other factors that you've been looking at. When you mentioned that Watershed, you want Watershed to be Watershed, I was wondering throughout this process how you've looked into speculation around like regenerative thinking and what Watershed will become, with that lens being applied to it. Has there been any thoughts on that?
I think that speaks to our stewardship strand a bit, actually, that we haven't fully dug into yet, thinking about what we might be as an organisation in the future, like 10 years, but then 100 years, what a charity model will look like then, we obviously don't know. Like, for example, one of the things we're thinking about now is nature on the board. What does it mean to have a nature representative on the board that is part of that decision-making process? And that's their kind of core focus, is the impact on nature. So building out from there, thinking about what we look like as an organisation in the future, and that's not something we will do. It's something we will do, if that makes sense.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, wonderful. Go again.
Just a small extra one. Have you started to look at the impact of people travelling to and from Watershed as part of the project, or is that out of scope?
Good point. It is something we have talked about in the environment group, actually. It falls under kind of scope 3 emissions. We haven't yet figured out the best way to do that. It's actually quite a difficult thing to quantify. We've also been talking to We the Curious, who are doing some work around that, so we're definitely looking to kind of share notes on that subject. For staff, yeah.
Any other questions? In that case, I think you wanted to...
We've got a final plug. So we've got 2 more events coming up. One is this evening at 6:30. So if you're sticking around for Open Studio Friday, then stick around until 6:30. So we're co-hosting a film screening with Dakan Collective, who are residents here, and also Fozia is on our advisory group. It's part of our Shared Futures Climate and Migration Community Film Festival. So we're showing a feature film called Thank You for the Rain and a short called Dead as the Dodo. Tickets are free, but just go and book at box office if you want to join us. And then on Thursday, the 4th of December, we're going to be talking about Wild and Generous at Bristol Climate Nature Partnership's Green Mingle. And that's at the station. And I think you can book tickets through their website.
All right. Thank you very much. All right, before you all go, if you want to stick around in Hot Desk today or find out more about what we do, please come find one of the studio team. Studio team, give us a wave. Vanessa is there at the back, concentrating deeply. If you're watching online, please drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you again next time.